What's up everybody, hope all is well. The concept of smurfing is well established and historically pretty cut and dry, but in Overwatch specifically it's taken on a meaning of its own. Rather, it's taken on many meanings of its own. As a result, its effects on the game are simultaneously a legitimate issue to discuss and the most overused catch-all excuse for losing. I think it's time we all got on the same page for whatever debate is to be had, so let's talk about it. I take video games to heart and aim to make others feel the same. Thus why I made this video, a topic that's potentially so damaging to the game and community deserves some attention. I'll admit, prior to making the video, I was indifferent on the subject. I had a statistical view of it where my chances of getting a smurf are the same as yours and it all kind of evens out in the long run, which is true, but ultimately that's too obtuse a view and doesn't do the nuances of the topic justice. The biggest challenge is that smurfing means different things to different people in Overwatch. Additionally, there are systems in game that impose restrictions and essentially force well-intentioned players to do it, and of course there are always those who simply want to exploit the system and troll. Each of those contributes to a mishmash of right versus wrong and ethical competitive judgments. How do you define smurfing in Overwatch? Not as easy to answer as you might think. How prevalent is it? Why do people do it? How does it impact gameplay? Could Blizzard stop it? Should Blizzard stop it? Will it get better or worse when Overwatch is on Game Pass? There's a lot to consider. And I'll be honest with you, there are no easy answers, but sharing my thoughts on the subject might help others sort of see through the fog of it all and learn to just roll with it. Those who see smurf in everything might find some relief, those who are forced into it might lessen the guilt, and those who do it just to troll, well, shame on you. Ironically, the impetus for this video was a recent series of interactions with a self-proclaimed smurf. I was left so dumbfounded at just how ridiculous the situation was that I started giving it all more thought. More on that shortly. Initially, I aimed to create an actual taxonomical hierarchy of smurfs for comedic purposes, but Rick and Morty Season 5 just hit HBO, so... Alright, I need to level with everyone. The concept of smurfing in Overwatch has gotten away from the community to such a degree that it's become a meme at this point. Accusations of smurfing because someone had a second account, because someone's low level but performing well, because someone's just playing better, and so on. None of that is valid, not being a jerk, just the tough love truth. The definition is clear. A highly skilled player uses alternate accounts that are ranked much lower to compete against low skilled players. That's it. Emphasis on highly skilled and low skilled. I say that because the conflated perception of what a smurf is serves only to exacerbate things. It's taken on a life of its own, becoming top of mind, constantly referenced, and ultimately part of the Overwatch lexicon. It's an unfortunate thing because once we break it down, you might feel differently. Knowledge is empowering, and even if it's still a guess, at least it's a well-informed guess, and that can change everything. The best way to look at it from here is to consider each type of smurf you might encounter. It'll help put each group in the whole into better perspective, so let's get into that. First up is the real smurf. Mega talented and equally as toxic, they play low ranks to dominate and ruin competitive integrity. I'm gonna go out on a limb and say these are rare. Let me provide some context to explain. So the current population is by and large veterans, and thus the median skill level has increased a lot. Even if your positioning is bad or you can't aim, odds are you're still savvy enough to function. You know some of the trick angles and sneaky tactics, and you're better armed to combat them. Take myself as an example. I'm a roughly plat level player. I fully expect a masters player to do better than me in a match, but I know enough to get lucky on a few tries and maybe even straight up legit counter once or twice. The skill gap is there and noticeable, but it's not a gulf where they're so much better as to dominate me and by proxy the match. Does that make sense? So when I take all this into consideration, I think that while smurfing exists, maybe it's only the extremes where it's outright ruining the game for players. Instead, conditions to dominate are, I won't say rare, but likely not as common as we think. I mean, just critical thinking. How many GM or even Masters players are spending time smurfing in bronze or silver? Very few, I'd imagine, and no, bronze to GM challenges don't count, but that's the sort of skill gap that's needed to outright dominate the entire match and affect the outcome and experience for 11 other players. Does that help rationalize our way to saying, okay, it's bad, but maybe not as bad as the community would have me believe? Yes? No? Okay, let's do better. Reluctant smurfs are those who are forced into it due to SR range limitations and the desire to play with friends outside those limits. I believe currently SR has to be within 1,000 for Diamond, 500 for Masters, and 350 for GM. Thus, it primarily affects Masters and GM, which is just a few percent of the population. I'd also put Bronze to GM challenges here. Those doing it to close an SR gap likely won't drop several brackets, often none, as a few wins and losses can fix it. And those doing Bronze to GM are climbing up, so odds are you'll never encounter them again. Even in the rare case they do get stuck in Plat or Diamond for a bit, well, they're losing and thus not exactly dominating matches, so I don't see a major impact on gameplay. Both are generally well-intentioned and less likely to be toxic. I'm not giving them a pass, but I'm also not giving them a hard time. I understand where they're coming from. The takeaway from this though should be that while present, reluctant smurfs are also not very common, but more importantly, their effects on the game are less profound. I'm starting to feel better about this smurf thing already. You? Yes? No? Okay, let's do even better then. Finally, we've got the most common variety, the clout-chasing Smurf. Extremely toxic, average skill, they aim to ride the coattails of the fad. Recall earlier how I said Smurfing had become a meme at this point? Well, this is the type of player that's led us here. Whether through insecurity or toxicity, some attach themselves to the concept because they think to be viewed as Smurf automatically elevates everyone's perception of their skill. But we've all been online long enough to see through that, right? Everyone's a hacker, everyone's a game developer, just like everyone's secretly a pro gamer. But the ferocity with which this tactic is run through the community has served to confuse and inflame the situation despite a total absence of any material impact on gameplay. If you search the forums for topics containing the word Smurf, you'll find about 500 from the last 12 months alone. And if you dig in, you'll see it's not only the most commonly discussed type of Smurf, but it's also filled with them boasting and almost flaunting the behavior. But again, we all see through this. It's like video game propaganda. It's nuts. As I said, this is likely the most common type of Smurf in Overwatch. Roughly 90% of the players exist from Diamond down, and thus it follows the largest group of average players would pursue this tactic in an attempt to elevate their stature, or just be toxic in general and continue to push the narrative. The takeaway for clout chasers is that while likely an overwhelming majority of the Smurfing population, they're of average skill, and chances are even worse. Thus, they're simply unable to dominate individual players or matches regardless of the skill bracket and ruin your game that way. Rather, you have to contend with the toxicity, something a quick mute can resolve. You'll still have to deal with them throwing or quitting when things don't go their way, but there's simply no way around that. As chance would have it, I have the perfect example of a clout-chasing Smurf. The interactions I'm about to show you are what spurred some deeper thought on the subject. I'll blur the names, but the word Smurf may or may not have been in the actual player's name, and the audio will make it clear they desperately want to be considered such. It's embarrassing, frankly, but I'm sharing for two reasons. First, to show this type of thing exists and it's just gross, and the second, because it was refreshing to see the community come to my defense. To me, a sign the average player understands this is garbage behavior and has no place in Overwatch. So a quick summary of events and then I'll let the video roll. The player in question spent the match criticizing teammates. Diff this, diff that, we're losing because of you, and so on. At the end, despite it being a draw, the player takes all credit for, again, a draw, okay, and out of the blue, singles me out. I handled myself appropriately, I feel. It's just a game and this person has obvious issues, so I said a few kind words and moved on. But surprisingly, a team member came to my defense. Thank you, you know who you are, and ultimately this particular Smurf was exposed. The end, where he claims to be a professional gamer, is epic levels of funny. Literally, we all laugh at him. But then I bumped into the Smurf again, though this time he was on the other team. I actually didn't even notice until chat started talking about his behavior and I connected the dots. Eventually, he solo ults and just straight up quits the match. Comments in the chat were hilarious. Smurf diff indeed.
I mean, I don't know what else you want to say. Like, you're literally getting diffed right now. One tracer and number 3. You're just gonna get insane so much value for no reason. Yeah, I'll take PayPal for that carry, Scotty.
Drop.
Did I do something to you personally or what? Holy cow.
No, you just
Play of the game.
Alright, man. So
Having a bad day, bud?
I'm having a great
That gives me
Double kill.
zero hope that your life is going well. Okay,
It
buddy.
is pretty plain and simple, buddy.
Okay.
That's why you're stuck in this rank, bro. You suck too.
Just point on the doll where Overwatch hurt you.
No, Overwatch doesn't hurt me. I'm on scholarship to play this game, bro.
I'll see you there,
That's
man.
legit.
As tragic as all this is, it's a prime example of why Smurfing has taken on a life of its own in Overwatch. It's moved away from being about skill to being about toxicity. To Smurfs like this, I'd say, you think gaming is a safe haven where you can let the worst parts of yourself out, but you should be thinking about how gaming is an exercise in learning to control the worst parts of yourself. You can do better as a human being. It's embarrassing for you. So what does all this tell us? Well, I believe that by and large, most Smurfs, as defined by the Overwatch community, are of average skill and thus unable to affect games in the traditional sense. Real Smurfs and reluctant Smurfs, while talented enough to dictate matches, just don't exist in the numbers needed to have a persistent and material impact across 90% of the player base. They are real, but the chances of you encountering one is slim when you consider the population differences. Rather, it's the clout-chasing Smurfs that dominate the landscape. The good news is they're no better than you, and often worse, but the sheer quantity is dictating the narrative. Now that we've got a better idea on the state of it all, let's talk about what, if any, actions Blizzard could or should take and how things will change once it's on Game Pass. This is actually a loaded question. Blizzard has the metrics and they know how real or overblown it is. Typically, I'd say that if they saw something egregious, they'd address it, but the Blizz of late, I'm not so sure. Though I don't blame them directly because a lot of revenue is involved in Smurf accounts and Activision leadership would rather protect that than the actual game, so their hands may have been tied. Good news is Microsoft seems to be much better at respecting their players and IP, so perhaps that'll pay off in advance of taking ownership? Maybe. Should they do something? Part of me says yes, though if I'm being honest after giving it some thought, I'm not convinced it's a massive problem that's destroying the game from a competitive integrity perspective. It's a problem for sure, but I think it's been overblown for the aforementioned reasons. Rather, more so due to the toxic elements. Knowing the type of stuff I showed you is rampant in Overwatch is heartbreaking for the game and community. It's so sad that what is undeniably the quintessential form of entertainment and escape for many gets ruined by a few bad apples. I think of people who just finished a 12-hour day or spent it all tending to children, those who've lost a loved one, people who are depressed, all those situations where something as simple as an hour of gaming gives them relief from it all, and this is what they encounter? Technically, the only thing I can think of is to use some form of two-factor authentication for account creation. It wouldn't stop Smurfs outright, but it would slow it down if every account needed its own distinct email and phone or dongle for the code. As with cheating in every game, people would devise workarounds, but again, it would raise the bar and at least make it a hassle and more expensive to do so. What do you think? Sounds like a lot, but arguably a small price to pay for potentially a huge benefit. We also need to consider Game Pass and possibly even going free-to-play. If other free-to-play games are an indication, player counts will rise, and along with it, a disproportionate amount of toxicity, including smurfing. There's been no talk of this, but I'd be really surprised if the PvP portion isn't on Game Pass at least, and with consoles being able to create infinite free accounts, it's worth considering. If it does happen, hopefully Microsoft will keep an eye on it and consider more strict requirements for account creation. Worth noting though, Phil Spencer himself has advocated for things like cross-platform bans, so there are signs that even the highest levels are aware toxicity in gaming needs some sort of counter. So, final thoughts. I hope this video put your mind at ease some. I do sincerely believe the likelihood of encountering a legit Smurf is low, and even when you do, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a total rout. So stay positive, give yourself some credit, and do your best. It's a team game after all, and you never know how it'll all shake out. The reality is, the crux of the smurfing problem in Overwatch is one of perception and has minimal, tangible impact on gameplay. They're primarily average skilled players who've latched onto the term for various reasons. As a result, while it seems prevalent, the efficacy of that prevalence is sorely lacking. So if you're someone who sees Smurf in everything, try not to sweat it so much. The odds are overwhelmingly in your favor. That's just not the case. If you're a true Smurf, I just don't understand what enjoyment you get from playing the game on easy mode, but to each their own. All I'd ask from you is give some thought to what gaming really means to people and decide if that's something you're willing to ruin for them just for a few selfish laughs. And finally, if you're a cloud chasing Smurf, just know you're not fooling anyone. When we see you in gold and you claim to be so good you're on scholarship, and then we see you 2 weeks later still in gold and you're not even able to beat us, it's embarrassing for you. And remember, these days someone is always recording, and the next guy might not be so nice as to blur names. And with that, I'm done. Appreciate you taking the time. Take care of one another, and I will see you soon.